Here's something you don't see every day: a group of leaders dismantling an entire narrative, brick by brick, to build something bold and unapologetically their own. That's exactly what Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta of Mali, and Abdourahmane Tiani of Niger are doing, and it's shaking the foundations of West Africa and beyond. The economic community of West African states. For decades, ECOWAS stood as a symbol of unity and progress, or so it claimed. Its buildings, monuments, and policies were designed to reflect ideals of cooperation among West African nations. But for millions across the region, ECOWAS came to symbolize something far darker: betrayal, exploitation, and a lack of sovereignty. Traoré, Goïta, and Tiani have flipped the script. They've not only rejected ECOWAS's influence, but have taken the bold step of physically erasing its symbols, starting with the imposing ECOWAS Square in Burkina Faso. Why? Because to them, and many others, it no longer stood for unity or progress, but for broken promises, foreign interference, and a system that prioritized the interests of external powers over the well-being of its people. The decay of ECOWAS credibility. ECOWAS was founded in 1975 with lofty goals to foster economic integration and political stability among its 15 member states. On paper, it sounded perfect, but the reality, especially for countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, was a different story. Instead of fostering unity, ECOWAS became a tool of control, often enforcing sanctions on nations that strayed from its prescribed path. These sanctions, touted as measures to uphold democracy or stability, disproportionately harmed ordinary citizens rather than the governments they were intended to pressure. For struggling nations already dealing with insurgencies and economic crises, these sanctions felt like an iron chain tightening around their necks. Take Burkina Faso, for example. It's a country rich in gold reserves yet plagued by poverty. Similarly, Niger's uranium lights up cities in Europe. But back home, many of its citizens live in darkness, lacking basic infrastructure and services. For decades, leaders like Traoré and his counterparts watched as ECOWAS remained silent about these inequities, while catering to the interests of Western powers and multinational corporations, dismantling ECOWAS Square. The demolition of ECOWAS Square in Ouagadougou was not just a physical act, it was a symbolic tearing down of an idea. Traoré and his allies saw the square not as a representation of unity, but as a reminder of exploitation and unfulfilled promises. This act was their way of saying, "We're done with this facade." And they didn't stop there. In place of the old monuments, they are erecting sculptures that reflect the struggles, resilience, and aspirations of their people. A mother shielding her children, a symbol of protection. A warrior standing tall with a shield, a tribute to resistance and courage. These aren't just monuments, they're declarations of a new narrative. One that prioritizes sovereignty, pride, and hope over subservience and dependency. Walking past these sculptures, people see themselves reflected in the art. These are their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. It's a deeply emotional connection, one that's reigniting a sense of pride and belonging among citizens who've long felt ignored. Sanctions and struggles. One of the primary grievances against ECOWAS was its heavy-handed approach to governance within the region. Sanctions became a favored tool of enforcement, used whenever a member state deviated from the organization's prescribed norms. In theory, these measures were meant to uphold democratic principles and stability. In practice, they often hurt the people more than the governments they targeted. For nations like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, already grappling with insurgencies, economic challenges, and the scars of colonial exploitation, these sanctions were devastating. They deepened poverty, disrupted lives, and left ordinary citizens bearing the brunt of decisions made far from their realities. As ECOWAS implemented sanctions against the military governments of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the people in these countries faced significant hardships. Borders were closed, financial transactions were frozen, and essential supplies, such as electricity and food, were severely impacted. The economic fallout has been particularly harsh in Niger, where the government faced a sharp decline in revenue due to the cessation of international aid and the freezing of bank assets. The social and economic consequences of these sanctions were far-reaching. In Niger, for instance, the closure of schools and businesses has disrupted daily life. Many sectors, including education, healthcare, and commerce, struggled to stay afloat due to the severe financial restrictions. However, despite these pressures, the military governments in these countries have shown little willingness to back down, with leaders continuing to reject ECOWAS's demands for a return to civilian rule. Leaders like Traoré and his allies saw these actions not as justice, but as control. To them, ECOWAS had become a proxy for Western powers, enforcing policies that prioritized foreign interests over African sovereignty. The sanctions, they believed, were less about principles and more about maintaining a status quo that kept certain powers in charge. When Traoré looked at ECOWAS Square, he didn't see a celebration of unity. He saw a monument to betrayal, a billboard proclaiming the subjugation of West African nations to external influences. The challenge of military coups. One of the most significant issues facing ECOWAS in recent years has been the rising frequency of military coups in West Africa. This trend is particularly pronounced in what has been called Africa's coup belt, where many countries have experienced political upheaval. Since 1990, the majority of coups in sub-Saharan Africa have occurred in countries that were once part of French colonial empires, raising questions about the role of French influence in destabilizing the region. In the 2020s, ECOWAS found itself grappling with a series of military coups, with the most notable instances occurring in Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso. These events posed significant challenges to ECOWAS's ability to uphold democratic governance in the region. In 2023, when Niger experienced its own military coup, ECOWAS strongly condemned the takeover and issued ultimatums demanding the restoration of civilian rule. This was followed by the activation of ECOWAS's standby force, which included military readiness from all member states except Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Cape Verde. Despite these strong statements and military posturing, ECOWAS's response to coups has often been viewed as inadequate, particularly in comparison to its earlier efforts in the 1990s and 2000s. In some cases, ECOWAS's failure to act decisively in the face of military takeovers has sparked debate about the organization's capacity to maintain regional stability. The leaders behind the movement, Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, and Abdourahmane Tiani, are not ordinary leaders. They've emerged as a united force, addressing the shared challenges of insurgency, economic instability, and external exploitation. These three men have shown the power of solidarity, proving that West African nations can be stronger together. Traoré, the young and charismatic leader of Burkina Faso, has become the face of this movement. Goïta in Mali and Tiani in Niger have brought their own strengths to the table, forming what some are calling the Avengers of West Africa. They're not just addressing their nation's challenges, they're challenging the entire framework that has held African nations back for decades. Their partnership sends a clear message to the world. African nations are reclaiming their narratives, rejecting external control, and building futures defined by their people's needs, not by the interests of foreign powers. The real impact on citizens. What does this mean for the average person in Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger? For years, these citizens have lived under systems that felt distant, uncaring, and unchangeable. Resources were extracted from their lands, but the benefits rarely trickled down. Decisions about their futures were made in boardrooms thousands of miles away, with little regard for their realities. Now, things are changing. Traoré and his allies are redirecting their nation's focus inward. They're investing in local industries, prioritizing security, and ensuring that their people, not foreign interests, are at the center of every decision. The monuments replacing ECOWAS Square are just the beginning. They symbolize a broader shift towards sovereignty and self-reliance. This shift is already resonating with people across the region. There's a renewed sense of hope, pride, and belonging. For the first time in a long time, citizens feel like their leaders are fighting for them, not against them. A continental movement. The actions of Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger are not happening in isolation. Across Africa, people are watching closely, inspired by these nations' bold steps. In East Africa, farmers frustrated by low crop prices dictated by global markets are asking why their leaders can't take a stand. In Southern Africa, young graduates facing unemployment are wondering why their futures are still tied to outdated systems built during colonial times. This is how revolutions begin, not with grand speeches, but with quiet questions. Questions that spread from village to village, city to city, until they become impossible to ignore. But let's be clear, this movement is not without its challenges. International organizations, foreign governments, and multinational corporations all have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Africa's resources, labor, and markets are vital to their economies, and they will fight to keep things as they are. These forces will attempt to discredit leaders like Traoré, Goïta, and Chiani, portraying them as reckless or dangerous. They'll use media campaigns, sanctions, and political pressure to sow doubt and fear. But the people of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have seen through these tactics before, and they're standing firmly behind their leaders. What's next for ECOWAS? As ECOWAS enters 2025, the organization finds itself at a crossroads: the withdrawal of 3 member states, the ongoing challenges posed by military coups, and the strained relations between the bloc and key countries such as Mali. Burkina Faso and Niger have tested the resilience of ECOWAS. The situation is further complicated by the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, which presents a significant challenge to ECOWAS's authority and cohesion, a new chapter for Africa. This moment feels different. For years, Africa has been told what it should be, how it should act, and who it should listen to. But now, Africa is beginning to tell its own story. Traoré, Goïta, and Chiani are leading the way, showing that it's possible to reject external control, prioritize sovereignty, and still succeed. The question now is, how far will this movement go? Will it inspire a continent-wide shift, reshaping Africa's political landscape for generations to come? Or will it face resistance from those who benefit from the current system? One thing is certain: the seeds of change have been planted, and the world is watching. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments, do you believe this movement will spread across Africa? What do you think it means for the future of the continent?